Hi, and welcome to How We Change the World podcast. Whether you're a regular subscriber or you're with us for the first time, I'm so glad you're here. You know, when we first launched this podcast, I interviewed some amazing individuals I'd been following for years. Because the podcast was brand new, though, many of you did not have an opportunity to hear from some of the most passionate, effective world changers that we've hosted. So we're launching a revisit series so that more of you have an opportunity to meet these amazing people and learn about their work. Now, today you're in for a real treat. You're going to meet Josie Naughton. Josie and her two pals were just ordinary citizens working at ordinary jobs, and they learned about this refugee crisis happening within a couple hours of their homes in England. The year was 2015, and a refugee crisis was building across Europe. Josie and her two friends wanted to help the people barely surviving in a makeshift encampment that had sprung up in Calais, France, where refugees were unhoused and desperate for food, clothing, blankets, and everything one needs to survive. What started with Josie and her friends gathering a few donations using their social media savvy has evolved into the charity Choose Love, who in 8 years has raised over $100 million to help support local grassroots organizations that help 5 million people in projects in over 41 countries. I mean, their story moves me so much, I get choked up every time I talk about it. Their success is the epitome of what individuals like Josie can do when moved by passion and purpose. So go ahead and turn on the captions so that you don't miss any of the good parts. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for free on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. So Josie Naughton, hi, and welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I feel so lucky to be here.
Well, I'm the lucky one. I've been following Choose Love and your work, not since you started, but for a couple of years. And Refugees is kind of my thing. The show's about how we change the world, but my softest spot, my thing that I always go to is refugees. So I particularly have been following you and the work you've been doing, and I love what you're doing. So I'm excited for other people in the U.S. to learn more about you.
Thank you.
And your work with Choose Love for sure. So before we get started, what are you doing? You're in the U.S. now. You're in San Francisco, but you're normally in London. You're London based.
Yeah,
I always by your accent.
I always say my cat is in London, so that is
that's where
based.
home is, right?
That's where home is, yeah. But I am on the road quite a lot, and I'm in the US a lot for fundraising. I've actually just been though at the border. I was in San Diego and Tijuana, and then I've just arrived in San Francisco.
Well, you know, I realized last night that I didn't think of a question about the Mexico border, but I want to start talking about it pretty early on because I don't want to forget it. I'd love to know if there's anything you can report that, because I've talked to people who tell us things that are not in the news, and you probably would do the same.
Yeah. You know, what always strikes me and struck me on this trip is kind of how, although it's obviously different and it's a different context, but how similar the situation is at this border or at the border in Greece.
Is it?
Yeah, it is. And in principle, in the fact that governments are like reinforcing these borders, they're making the system so hard and so complex for people to be able to navigate that we're kind of seeing an almost ban on asylum that's happening across the globe. And then there's just these, you know, huge numbers of people who have been through more than we can ever imagine. And in Tijuana, there are just these amazing organizations, grassroots, community-based organizations who are supporting people, helping them navigate the system. You know, people are being put in detention. Depending on the color of your skin, you're treated in a different way by the government. It's heartbreaking to hear that.
Which government are you referring to? The Mexican government or the U.S. government?
That happens everywhere, but in this case, the US government. You know, I was really struck by something that I heard. There's this new app, the CBP One app, which is what people have to use to get their appointment. Okay. And it's basically impossible to navigate. But even with that app, they're only doing 200 interviews a day. but they have the capacity to do at least 400 a day. And when Ukrainians were arriving at the border, they were doing 1,000 a day. So it shows you how possible it is, but that there's a choice.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
You know, I was going to get to this later, but this is such an important point. One of the reasons why I appreciate you and choose love and trust organizations so much is that you always speak the truth, and you don't often hear that. Well, you rarely hear it with government or anything. You hear it a little bit in the press, but when I hear you talking about what's going on in Syria, like with the UN or Russia bombing, Syrians right after the earthquake, or what you're saying now, that the color of your skin can determine how you're treated at the border, which obviously we almost know that by just because that's how life is. But to hear it said, I love that you speak the truth about what governments are doing, because that's important.
Thank you so much. It actually means a lot to me that you've picked that up, because it's something that's really important to us. And in the kind of over the years, as we've done different strategy sessions, speaking the truth is always something that's that we make sure is in there, and that is really, really important to us.
Well, you're a very different brand of CEO. I mean, in the US, we don't call the head of charity CEOs. We typically call them directors. But in the UK, that's a CEO of a charity. Yeah. Well, let's back up a little bit so people know what the heck we're talking about. Why don't we start with just talking about, and some of this I know is going to be repetitive for you, but probably that's what your job is, right? Yeah. Being repetitive. Yeah. So can you just talk about maybe what the mission is and just what you do, what Choose Love does?
Of course. So the mission of Choose Love is to work towards a world that chooses love and justice every day for everyone. And we do that by where we're focused on is forcibly displaced people, so refugees, asylum seekers, people who are internally displaced in their countries. And
even from something like an earthquake or a natural disaster.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's kind of really developed over the years. Yeah. But we basically try to close and prevent gaps in services and protections for refugees and displaced people. And we do that by fundraising and then using the funds that we have raised to give to community-based frontline organizations who are really doing the work. And what we've seen over the years is that when you go to all of these different contexts of emergencies, you expect to see big aid agencies or governments there, and you tend not to. You actually see grassroots community organizations. And so we just want to get the resources into their hands because they know what is best to do. We prioritize organizations that are led by the impacted community themselves. And we fund completely cross-sector, and we fund lots of different organizations in an ecosystem, because we really believe that when an ecosystem of people is resourced, then that's when we see the change in the world that we want to see.
My goodness. Okay. So first of all, I've heard this now a number of times from different people that I've interviewed, and just, I've read also that often you don't see the big NGOs that everyone's giving the money to. And I remember when I was a kid, my dad said, don't give your money to those big NGOs because they never get there. And I always thought he was a bit of a, naysayer or something, but I've heard this way too many times now to know it's not true. Where's all that money going? Because that's what most people say. Well, I won't name names, but they'll see the big names that they know, and they're like, well, it's safe to give to them. And then here's somebody who's on the scene, knowing that those people aren't always showing up first or fully. So
is it?
I have to go so far as to say it's corruption, or would you go that far, or do you know?
I think it's really complicated. I think that some of the INGOs do amazing work, and they do work that grassroots organizations and organizations like Choose Love can't do. Okay. Do I think that they are as efficient as they could be? No. I think a lot of it is inefficiency. I think a lot of it is bureaucracy. I think a lot of it is red tape. I think a lot of it is so in terms of speed, I mean, that's one thing. When there's when the invasion of Ukraine happened, when the earthquake happened, people need help in that moment. And by the time that the big organizations and governments have set strategies and got it approved by everyone that it needs to get approved by, it's often too late for the support that's needed.
Especially when you're talking about life or death situations, when they help that moment, that day, that week.
And in the earthquake, that was, I think, the most stark example of that, because it literally was a race against time to get people out from under the rubble. And so I think that the bureaucracy of it and the time it takes and all the different layers things have to go through, which of course it is still important to make sure everything is safe. But I hope that Choose Love shows that you can still do that, but also do it fast. Yeah. I think sometimes these are big machines. And by the time the big machine is paid for, the amount of funding that actually ultimately gets released is really small. And I think that's one of the things. Yeah. I think sometimes it's like people who are based in offices in the US or the UK, they've never been to the grounds. They're not plugged into what's happening there. Yeah. They actually just don't know.
Well, that's also one of the things that is so remarkable about you, is that you're there on the ground. You're the head of the organization, and you're there. You're in Turkey on the ground. You're getting, I don't know if you go into Syria or not, but if they let you. But I mean, did you go to Ukraine as well?
I really want to go. I nearly went, but it was decided that for safety, I couldn't. But I've been to the border in Poland, and I spent a lot of time in Poland. Zone. There. Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, but some of our team, like specialist team members and colleagues have gone in, and the same on this recent trip to Turkey. One of our colleagues, he did go into northwest Syria again. I was going to, but for various different reasons, I couldn't. But go right up to the border. But it's so important, and I think because of, and we'll probably get there in a minute, but the origin story of the organization was there was no intention to set up an organization, and it was going to places, seeing what was happening, and then being like, oh my God, we have to do something about that. And so that is really important, to keep that ethos of being there and truly understanding what's going on, so that we can look people in the eyes and say, I 100% know where your money's going, and I 100% know it's going to the right place.
Yes. Okay. Well, we will talk more about that and the origin story. The only thing I wanted to say first is I just wanted to put some numbers out there, because if this is the accurate figures right now, you supported almost 4 million people worldwide. With your partners on the ground. You've distributed more than 5 million meals, 3 million, you call them nappies, we call them diapers, and 650,000 items of clothing. You've rescued 20,000 people at sea, which was a whole new thing I wanted to know about. I wasn't aware of that before. 200,000 medical consultations. I mean, the numbers are massive. I think you've raised $100 million.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's why that number it's mind-blowing, because of the origin story you're about to tell, because you're only 8 years old. Well, you're not. I told you look young. You don't look that young. But the organization's only 8 years old. So to go from 0 to 100 million in 8 years does not seem even, it's a phenomenon. It doesn't seem like that could happen. So start from your day job, just to say, 8 years ago, you're working for the manager of Coldplay. You're the assistant to the manager of Coldplay. Yes. So what are you doing there? You managing concerts, or what was your job there like?
I mean, I was a personal assistant, so I was doing a bit of everything, and supporting him and the team. But what was so incredible was that I saw so many different aspects of, I guess, if you want to call it, the business model. I saw how branding was done. I saw how marketing was done. I saw how touring was done. I saw how all of their charity work was done. I saw how they,
goodness.
I had like,
that was your training.
I had the most amazing education there, and like, you know, it's incredible what they've achieved, and the scale that they work on. But they also always treat everyone with kindness. They give everyone all of their time. I learned both a lot about like different industries, but also about like a way of
humanity of it. Yeah.
And so it really was the best. It was better than any degree I could have done in terms of the training for this, and it was very transferable skills.
That's amazing.
I feel very lucky and grateful.
And it's been such a the marketing and the branding has been a huge, and the way you've raised money, just the modernness of it, the hipness of it, the accessibility of it. It feels like something you can relate to, even if you're not your age. If you're my age, it's just like, as compared to something that's very staid and serious, this is more makes you want to have fun and makes you want to get involved. So it's really been a master stroke. So, okay. So then you heard, so it's like 2015 and you heard about this in Calais, what was going on to migrants and immigrants and refugees just stuck in a very bad situation.
Yeah, it was, I'd been living in Los Angeles, and everyone had gone back to England in the summer, so I had also gone back. And that was when it was coined the refugee crisis. Yeah. And so it was over 1 million people arrived in Europe seeking sanctuary and safety. And it was mainly people
sorry, I was going to ask, mostly from Syria?
Yeah, mostly from Syria. So I think it's about 70% were from Syria.
Okay.
But it was also people from Afghanistan, from Iran, from Iraq, from Eritrea, from Sudan, from the Congo, often like up to 20 nationalities, 25 nationalities in a camp at a time. And so it was just crazy. And the images that we were seeing on the news of families crammed into these small boats, of people trekking across borders through the forest, we hadn't seen images like that since World War II, and it just felt so heartbreaking. And I was just,
and it was right there. It was close,
it was on the
physically.
doorstep. Yeah, exactly. And so I said to a couple of friends at lunch, I feel like we should try and do something. Why don't we try and raise £1,000? Why don't we put on some kind of like little night? And then we could gather some tents and sleeping bags. We got connected to someone who was volunteering in Calais, and they told us like the list of items that was needed, which was like tents, medical kits, socks, boots, food, certain types of food.
And just so people can think of your London base in Calais it's in France, but it's about 3-hour drive through across the English Channel.
Yeah, if you go, from driving from London all the way there takes about 3 hours, but the actual train journey between the two countries is less than an hour.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh. So if you do the Eurostar London to Calais, it's less than an hour. Which is, it's so
it's right there.
And it's the British border is in Calais. It's externalized to there.
Okay.
And so. We wanted to do something to help. We set up these links. I think we were kind of one of the first social media charities, I guess, that was born on social media. And people really wanted to help, but there wasn't an obvious way to do it. And I think we were actually going to be called We Can Help You Help for a minute.
We can help you help. Yeah.
Yeah. And because people wanted to help and they didn't know where to put that energy. But to our surprise, we raised over £50,000 in the first week.
Oh, in a week? Just with your friends and
it got shared a lot. And we were very lucky to be connected to a lot of people that had, social media followings and stuff.
Right. Okay.
So it raised over £50,000. And then I had got an Uber in my lunch break to a storage center and begged them to give us a room for free because I couldn't store. I have so many people on Facebook said, I've got 10, I've got sleeping bags. I didn't have anywhere to put it. So I went to the storage space, begged them for a room. They said yes. And then we thought, why don't we do an Amazon wish list of the items? It was actually one of the co-founder's sisters who thought of it. So we thought that's a great idea. People can buy things and it will be new. So amazing. And so, but to my surprise, again, I got a phone call from this storage center the next day saying, Amazon have been in touch. You've got a huge truck coming with 7,000 items.
That almost made me cry for some. Did that just overwhelm you? That just overwhelms me hearing about it. 7,000 items.
Yeah, I do you know it was. I look back now sometimes, and it was such a whirlwind that I can't. Yeah. It was overwhelming. It was like, now we have to get volunteers to help us put it all away. So, and I was like,
it's growing itself.
Yeah, I'm going to call Pizza Hut and ask them if they'll give free pizzas for the volunteers. I mean, it was very. Yeah, it was very organic.
Yeah.
But before we knew it, there were 40 people showing up every day to volunteer, because the 7,000 packages arrived every day for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so there were people from all ages, kids who just done their exams who were 16.
Oh my goodness.
Grandmas.
Did you just quit working for a while? You were on break anyway.
I was moonlighting a bit, to be honest.
Okay.
I probably wasn't doing a very good job at my job. And it was totally crazy. And a lot of the other kind of core members of the team still now arrived at that time to come and volunteer in the storage center.
They're volunteers. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so we then had all of this stuff. We had all of this funding. Mm-hmm. And what is still true now, in the same way that being on the ground and really knowing what's happening is really important to us, really doing right by people who've given us their money, their time, their energy, their love, was also really important. And so we decided we would go to Calais and we would see who was the best person to give this all to. And I truly believed that we would find a Save the Children. I probably shouldn't, name the names of it, but a big NGO, or a government there. And there was not. There was 5,000 people and they were living in a field. It was like mud up to your knees. People didn't have shoes on. People didn't have enough food. People didn't have enough access to water. On the news, there'd just been all of these images of lots of young men who still absolutely deserve our support. But there was families, children, the elderly.
Oh, they weren't showing so even the news wasn't showing the full picture.
No, it wasn't showing the truth.
I've seen a lot of pictures of that time too, and you're right. It just looks like, because they were calling it like a jungle, and it's just like, dog eat dog, and all these young guys running around and, being dangerous in one way.
Yeah.
But no, I never, hear about families or kids or anything.
No. And so it was shocking. I met unaccompanied children that day. I didn't even know that there was such a thing as unaccompanied children. I always find it, in the I now work very much in the sector, and it's always like UAM or UAC, and it's like it's so what we're actually talking about is children,
stripping the humanity out of it, completely. The truth of it out, really.
The truth of it. And I met an 8-year-old who was alone there on this journey, and I always say couldn't unsee what we'd seen, and it was never the same again.
There were no structures in place. Were there some, or there were none? There was zero.
None. Literally none. There was some local French actors, like French organizations, who were trying to distribute, who were trying to build shelters. One in particular who we worked with for a number of years, called L'Auberge de Migrants, who were made up of mainly retired teachers, who were doing the job that a state should be doing.
So France had no involvement whatsoever. The country of France, the government of France.
There was like the riot police were there in their riot police outfits, tear gassing the people, gassing the family field at night. Wow. There ended up being some state support, but like not to the degree that was needed at all. And the state just continued to make the humanitarian work more and more difficult. But we ended up renting a warehouse at that time. We started a distribution system, a shelter building program. We started to work to support the unaccompanied children by funding social workers and doing a lot of advocacy. And at the same time, we were getting plugged into the grassroots response in Greece, where 10,000 people were arriving every day. All of this also coincided, that Amazon wish list coincided with the photo of the little boy, Aylan Kurdi, who washed up on the shore, which is just, it's just a heartbreaking image, but it changed the world. I really think it did.
I think it changed the world also. I just had someone on this program a couple of weeks ago who started what's it called? Mobile Medics International she was retired. She saw that picture. Yeah. And started this whole organization. And I felt like I already knew kind of what was going on, but I can't, that image is just never, ever leaves you.
No. It
really showed us like, so these are people, these are little children, these are.
I know, with his little shoes on. I know. It's truly heartbreaking. And I think that the outpouring of support that we had was because of that photo. So we probably wouldn't be here today in the in this place. But just such a tragedy. And so we were one of someone I was working with at the time flew out to Greece because I couldn't, because I had work. But
why? I mean, why were you looking over at Greece, and why were you?
We were getting plugged into the volunteer networks on Facebook, and so we were like, we need to be helping there. It sounds like desperate, and actually the scale and the numbers are higher.
Oh, so you already could see that you wanted. So that was my question. Like, how did you, pivot, I guess, from France into Greece? Because
it happened.
Were you finished there at this? It happened at the same time.
Same time. It was in the
so
same.
You're like, well, we can help them. So did you now have this feeling that, oh, this is actually something people can just do? Like, I think it's really important for people watching this show to hear this story, because, a lot of what I want people to understand is that things look so unreachable. Oh, you raised $100 million. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to run an organization. But, I could gather some things and, go. So to see 100%. How you built it slowly really helps.
We never intended to be an organization.
Yeah.
I certainly never, ever thought that, 10 years ago, I was a barmaid. And
barmaid. Yeah. And then you worked there, and then you worked a couple of years with Coldplay.
Yeah.
So I see.
Yeah. I worked in telly a bit as well, but I think that is the thing. Like, if you aim, it's really important to have like the big vision and dream, although we didn't have that to start with. But I think setting smaller goals that are achievable, that if I was to be starting over, that's definitely what my advice would be. But for us, this was just like, this is a literal humanitarian crisis, but the likes of which never seen in our lives. And we have to act now and do our part.
And have the ability.
And we were building up this social media following, and people were donating. And then so in Greece, unlike France, the kind of Greek civil society is very strong. And so there was a lot of response, but it was not by states or NGOs. Again, it was by Greek civil society and some international actors, small grassroots organizations. So we didn't need to set up our own thing, but they needed funding, they needed awareness, they needed volunteers, they needed aid. And so the model of raising money and then grant giving to these organizations began. And again, because we didn't have any experience in this sector, it was just asking the community themselves and then these organizations, what do you need? And we didn't know that was a radical way of doing things, was to ask what people need and then raise the money and give it to them. But it turns out that was actually quite radical. Oh,
that's so amazing. It just seems like the most obvious thing, right? But it had developed in a whole other way, so people didn't even think that way.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole NGO had developed that we're going to figure out what you need and give it to you. And since you didn't know that system, you just went and did what was logical, which turns out to be the much better way.
Yeah.
Did anyone stop you on the ground ever, whether it was in France or in Greece, and say, hey, who are you? What are you doing here?
Oh my gosh. Yes. Definitely. And I mean, in so many different ways, there was hostility from governments, from councils, from the police.
Why hostility?
Because people didn't want these people to be there.
Oh, so they'd rather they didn't have the help.
Yeah. And there's been a very scary trend of like criminalization of humanitarian workers over the last few years. But then also I think some of the the volunteers or the aid workers, because lots of these organizations were often set up by people who'd worked in the more formal sector and then felt heartbroken that the formal sector wasn't responding. So they were lots of experts as well who were working with a bit like, who are these who are these girls? And I would be like turning off I'm so embarrassed now, but I had like a little fluffy jacket and like bunches buns. Like, who is this girl?
You weren't really blending in.
No. But the proof is in the pudding, and the work speaks for itself. And so when people, you say, what do you need? And people say, we need this. And then you're able to deliver that. Hopefully we were able to build trust, but it's these contexts are all very complicated, and we've learned a lot. We've made mistakes. It's been a journey. It's been a lot to work out, but we just grew so quickly because we kept being told, oh, actually, you're on one Greek island. We were flying out doctors. We were funding field hospitals, funding lights that shone out to the sea so the boats didn't crash on the rocks.
Yeah.
Then they're like, oh, actually, this island also needs help. Or then actually this country in the Balkans, they need help. And then
there's no end. There's no end to it.
And people in Turkey need help. People in Syria need help. And so we kept thinking, well, okay, we'll try our best. And it just grew so fast because the need
How many
was so
of you
big.
were there at the beginning?
At the beginning, the core team was about 6 of us.
Okay. Did you eventually start hiring people? When did you decide, okay, I'm going to quit I have to quit because I've been at work for a month?
I became full-time. So we started in the August of 2015, and I became full-time in the January of 2016. Though, to be honest, I was working full-time before that.
They're probably not listening.
Yeah.
We want our money back.
But we weren't paying ourselves for a good year, I think. And then there was still, even like 2 years later, it was only 3 or 4 of us who were working full time. But we were paying stipends for volunteers. So we had could have 200 volunteers a day. We had field managers, and because of the model of us raising funds and grant giving it to organizations, we transitioned out of being operational ourselves because we felt that wasn't the most effective thing. And we sat under, we still do actually, a kind of fiscal sponsor in the UK.
Oh, really?
So we paid them a fee. And they managed all of the finances. So we had a team who did all of the finances and the legal and the compliance.
Yeah. So you really could just focus on exactly what you needed to do. You're so streamlined.
Exactly.
But you still are under fiscal sponsor?
Yeah, we are. We have a 501c3 in the US. But in the UK, obviously we're in a position now where we could be on our own and build that finance and compliance team. But it adds a double layer of due diligence. We work in really complex contexts.
I see. That's interesting. It's worth it for you then.
Yeah, I sleep well at night knowing that everything is double checked. That actually the funding is, I've never ever had access to the bank account to be able to send money. They have to do everything. It gets approved by multiple people. Working with them, they're called Prism, the Gift Fund. It's been the best thing that we've ever done.
That's really smart. I haven't heard about people doing it for that reason. I mean, of course, at the beginning, but to continue it because that level of trust for other people giving you money is so high as well. So I guess that's probably more standard than I've run an NGO, but not for a while, and I always try to do my own, and I did not sleep well at night. So.
Yeah, I mean, I still don't really sleep that well, but one set of worries is taken care of by being with Prism.
I was wondering when you're talking about, and I heard you on another podcast or interview saying that it was sort of a wake up call to find out that sometimes that, like you thought, like I would think too, like most people would think, that if there were people in trouble. That if others just knew about it, that there would be help coming to them. Like, right? Why wouldn't they?
Yeah, I genuinely. Sorry, no, you.
Well, it must have been has a heartbreaking bit of a trip that you've been on to see kind of the darker side of humanity that they are blocking. I mean, before maybe they were ignoring that they're refugees, but I know. I'll just tell you really quick. I worked a little bit. I wrote a book about people who changed the world called One Person Acted and Everything Changed. And one of the people I interviewed in it was Christopher Katrabane, who started MOAS, which is...
Oh, yes, amazing. We work with MOAS.
Oh, you do? Oh, my goodness. And that was the thing. He's like, well, there's people drowning trying to get from Africa to Europe. They're just drowning in the water. So, forget the politics. Let's pull them out and then worry about it, right? Like, let's save them first, and then we'll talk about politics or where they should live. But there's a lot of people not wanting that to happen. They'd rather have them drown.
I know.
And it's just like, how do you accept that? It can't.
You can't. No, I know.
How do you, it should be on the front page of every paper, you know?
I know. I just feel exactly the same, and I still can't really get my head around it.
That's good. I hope you never do.
Yeah. It's so mind-boggling, and as I said, on that first trip I did to northern France, and I met unaccompanied children, I was like, I was so hard. I remember I just cried so much, and then I learned, like, you shouldn't cry in front of people. So like, learn to control that. But I just thought, well, they must not know. And they must not know that they're there. And if we tell the people in power that there are kids on their own there, then they'll do something about it. And then over time, we went and knocked on all of these doors. Yeah. And I was, I look back now, I was like, God, I was so fearless. Literally going, like, into Parliament, demanding to speak to MPs. Yeah, going into offices of big NGOs. And
well, you're still pretty fearless. Now you just understand what you're up at, the truth of what you're doing, but you're still fearless.
And it was heartbreaking to see, wow, people do know this is intentional. Like, a lot of it is intentional. And
that's so hard too. By supposedly good people, right? The people.
Yeah. And, just with the earthquake, you mentioned this earlier, but the white helmets who, I don't know if you know who, I imagine you do,
just since the war started, they have been so instrumental in helping, but go ahead, explain who they are.
They're incredible. They are the organization who started when the regime, and then later Russia, was bombing its own people.
This is in Syria.
Syria. They rescued the people from the rubble. They've saved over 100,000 lives.
100,000.
100,000 lives, and risk that they've lost 10% of their staff over the years, to just show the heroism of these people.
I just want to make it a little bit more clear for anyone listening who doesn't really understand the situation. So, I mean, not to explain the war in Syria, but the government is bombing its own people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the situation in the country. And
people asked for democracy in 2011, and that's what they were met with.
Yeah. And so, I mean, everyone's familiar that they use chemicals on their own people and the whole bit. So these white helmets, I don't know where they emerged from, but they formed just like, like the good guys, and they just started rescuing their own people that weren't being rescued by the government, that were being killed by the government. Yeah. So they're still, I don't hear much about them anymore. So they're still together. They're still helping.
They're still there, and the bombs are still dropping, and people don't know about it. But their work has developed. There's this area, it's like the non-regime area. There's 4.5 million people living there,
in the north,
million children in Northwest. Yeah. And they are like the emergency services. They do the fire rescue. Any emergency, they're called. They fix the roads, the bridges, the water systems. They do education. They do support for medical. They're the ambulance. I mean, they kind of do everything that a state would do. They're the most incredible people that have the great privilege of working with. But when the earthquake struck, they put a call out immediately for help from the UN, because they were the only people that had the equipment to be able to carry out search and rescue, but they didn't have everything that they needed.
So they were in Syria, and they called out to the UN and said, we need help. Okay.
Yeah. And instead of helping, the UN went round and round in circles whilst people were losing their lives under the rubble, because Russia sits on the Security Council of the UN about whether they could send help across the border or not. And by the time that they did do anything to help, it was too late. And they've had to apologize. They've apologized now, but it's such empty words. You just like, I just can't. Something I'm really proud of is that we were one of, if not the first people to reach out to them to offer funding.
To the white helmets?
Yeah, but how tragic is that? Like,
well, it's deeply, deeply upsetting to hear that about the UN. I know I read that you wanted to be, when you were a kid, that you wanted to work with the UN, and
I
now you're probably
did.
thinking, geez, I don't need to. Like, I'm doing better than the UN is. Like, I'm actually being more responsive than the UN.
Yeah,
But that's
it's
very,
sad.
I mean, I don't, that's just like that's a whole nother conversation, because that so does not belong in an emergency situation that they're even considering anything in this to
No.
do with Russia, what Russia thinks should happen in Syria is, it's just, it's sickening, honestly, because I bet
really
a
is.
lot of people died because of that decision.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And that is the like real time consequences. I'm also like, I think I was very naive when I started this work, and I'm not so naive now. Like I understand I understand that all of this stuff is so complicated.
Everything has a repercussion somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
So if they do that there, then in Ukraine, something else is going to happen.
Yeah.
And I know it's not simple, but it's like pulling the people out of the water. Just, can you save their lives and then argue about it?
Exactly.
Later.
Exactly. And that
and the UN should know better.
They should. Yeah, they should.
They do know better,
or at least speak out and say this is not okay, or the system isn't working, or whatever. But no, to go back to the original question, I went right off on the tangent. But the education
with you,
the education of the system, and it really is built against these people, and displaced people are often the most vulnerable communities on earth, and that people vilify them and use their situation for political gain is really sad.
And you alluded earlier to the color of your skin. I mean, I just have seen, because I've worked in the Middle East a lot, and I could just tell from my sheltered little world in the U.S. that when the Ukraine refugee crisis started, I mean, everyone I know had Ukraine, and I also supported Ukraine. I mean, no one was not supporting the refugees, but the difference in the response to Ukrainian refugees versus the 700 million, however, I don't know how many there are right now. I mean, that are black. They're black and brown and Muslim and, Mexican and whatever, but they don't look like white Europeans or white, Westerners. So it's just, it's the core of what society is, but it's hard. It's hard to see that in real time and to know, but it makes me understand more the importance of like people like you, people that are actually out there doing the work, that don't take that stance, that fight for because when it's really clear what the problem is, don't you think it galvanizes you more to say, okay, well, this is happening, so now we have to work 10 times harder to get through, because now we know what we're up against.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely think so. I think the drive of the organization and of me is exactly built on that. Like we know what we're up against, and so we've got to fight for what we believe in. But with Ukraine, it was I'm the same. I always feel torn, because obviously it's horrific what happened,
and the numbers are horrific,
and the numbers are horrific, and no one person has more value than any other person. So for the situation for the displaced Ukrainians, they absolutely deserve all of the support and more. Like, to be honest, the world has moved away. The organizations we work with now, they're still facing the same thing, and that there isn't the funding for them. Like, more help is still needed for Ukraine, but the disparity between the response for Ukraine and the response for other places, in Russia was bombing in Syria, and for all of this time, no one was doing anything. And then when they started doing it in Ukraine, everyone did. The level of outpouring of support was so huge, and I don't think lots of people haven't joined the dots to see like it's the same thing.
Country.
So what the tactics that they used in Syria were then used in Ukraine. It was, they were testing things out. And
do you think so?
I think so, or at least like a lesson, whether it was testing it out for what was in the future,
or
maybe
they just
not, but they're
took the
learning
lessons and
from what they're
applied it.
doing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a better way to say it. And
I know.
but yeah, and then even within Ukraine, you know, something that we've seen time and again in the different places we worked is that there's a disparity in response for people from different places, and then there's the most marginalized are usually always left out. And so with Ukraine, we prioritized finding organizations both who were working right on the front line, but also those that were supporting marginalized communities. And I'm sure you probably remember seeing in the news there was this horrible instance that people of color and Black people from different universities within Ukraine were trying to cross the border, fleeing, and then they weren't being allowed to cross into Poland. It was so appalling and disgusting. And so we were able to work with an amazing organization called Foundation for Somalia, started by an amazing man from Somalia called Elmi, who lives in Poland.
Really?
And he and his team were like there helping those people, advocating for them at the border. But it was really important to us that we were finding those organizations and getting resources to them. And the same for the organizations helping the elderly or people with disabilities who so often get left out of the response.
Wow. How do you find these organizations on the ground? That's one of the questions I had. Like, you just literally have to go there and start looking when something happens.
So much of our work has come from that, but obviously we have a network now of grassroots responders, of human rights activists, journalists, people who work in the formal sector in the NGOs, and just to say, they're not like, some of them are incredible, like MSF, for example, are like my favorite. I don't know, I wouldn't really put them in the same group, but that we work a lot with people from MSF and
for Americans, that's Doctors Without Borders. Everything's a little different.
It is. And so with Ukraine, we didn't work inside Ukraine. We worked on the Poland-Belarusian border. We had a couple of organizations there, so we had some network. We flew a team of 2 out to Poland on the day of the invasion, and then we just really started putting our feelers out, and we were just asking advice from other organizations. Who should we be supporting? Who's supporting marginalized communities? And just really, really putting the effort in, to do our homework and find out who was working, who was responding. Journalists who were inside were telling us, like, I'm here at this school and there's 800 people living here, and this is the organization who's giving everyone food. So then we would get connected to them, and then you have how are we going to get the money to them? Then there's always that's the also always hard, and the next
always
step,
figuring stuff out.
But you just have to put the effort in. It's just a lot of like putting puzzle pieces together, I think, and taking the time and resource to do that.
And you get better at it. The more you do it, the more you figure out how to do it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, because some things probably start to look the same in terms of where you start, like, whereas when the first time you show up, you don't know anything, but now you're like, oh, I need to get this and this set up.
Exactly. And we, there's things that we know now. We know that it will be the grassroots who will be responding. We know that there's going to be a need for food. We know there's going to be a need for temporary shelter. We know that there's a need for women's support. We know women who are traumatized might not be able to breastfeed. And so you need to make sure that there are organizations who will support those women. There's all of these lessons that we now know.
I want to pivot. I want to leave plenty of time to talk about fundraising, because this is something you figured out how to do, and really, really well. I mean, I don't. It's just kind of mind blowing the amount of money that you've been able to raise and distribute. There's so many different ways we can talk about it, but let's talk about the stores, because everyone loves to talk about the stores. I want to go to a store. You have these pop-up stores. But,
so in 2016, in the winter, we were now like you know, I want to say fairly established. We're only a year and a half old, but we were fairly established, and we were working across countries, continents, and supporting people through winter. And we were really, really lucky to be the Guardian newspaper charity partner.
Oh, really?
And, yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
And again, a lot of the Guardian journalists worked really closely with us because we were on the ground. And so we were able to give them the information and the access that they needed to write their story. So those journalists advocated internally at the Guardian to make us the charity partner. But we raised nearly £1 million through that partnership. And the following year, we were just like, what are we going to do? Because we can't be the Guardian charity partner again. And it's going to be winter. We were now even bigger and still working completely. I mean, we're not to the same degree now, but at that time, it would often be a week before the end of the month, and I'd be like, "Oh my god, how are we going to pay for all the invoices next week?" And somehow something magical would always happen.
Yeah, you have some help coming too.
Yeah,
and other places.
Yeah. And but ahead of this winter, we were really like, what are we going to do? And people had kind of got a bit bored of talking about the refugee crisis, and the tension was waning, and there was a bit of donor fatigue, I would say. And someone that we worked with on Syria had just been on his honeymoon, and he was a creative and comms expert, and he
and what expert?
Like communications expert. Comms. Yeah. And he had been thinking about our Amazon wish list. And he, on his honeymoon, had this idea, what if they did the Amazon wish list as a store? And he came into the office.
Picture this guy on his honeymoon trying to figure out all the stuff.
And he came into the office and he said, I've had this idea, can I have a meeting? So we had a meeting. He's called James. He runs a creative agency called Glimpse now, which he was just setting up at the time. And he said, what if you did a physical store, the Choose Love store, you opened on Black Friday to turn consumerism on its head. And
on Black Friday?
Yeah, on Black Friday. And people could, it would be like the Amazon wish list. People could buy the items and they would get sent to refugees. And I just thought it was the most amazing idea. Shared it with the team. We all thought it was brilliant. And then we worked on developing it together. And we'd now learned that, buying aid in a country and then shipping it to other countries is not economic. It's not environmentally friendly. Right. You need to be supporting local economies. So we were like, right, people can buy the items and then we'll use those funds to give to our partners in the country so they can buy the items locally. So the model kind of developed from there. And then we were like, well, we may as well keep it open until Christmas and for the holidays, because people can buy presents. It was a pop-up store. Yeah, it still is. It pops up every year. So I asked a friend, do you know where we can get someone can give us a free store space in Soho in London? Got connected to someone. They gave us the store for free.
Oh, really? Free?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah.
And before, I think we turned it around in 6 weeks. We opened this store, the Choose Love store. We wanted it to look cool. We wanted to turn charity shops on their head a bit too, and not make it like stuffy, not make it something that was just for one bit of society, but something for everyone that was like a cool place to be. So we made it look like the Apple store. We had a long table down the middle, like the Apple store with all of the items on. We had a big Instagram moment, a Choose Love sign that we made out of the gold like blankets that keep people warm from shop.
Explain the items a little bit, because I think maybe we didn't get that clarity of what you were selling in the shop. Like, so that's what makes it so
so it was
amazing.
It was built around what we needed to be distributing and what we needed to be funding that winter. So the idea on the table, we split it into 3 sections: arrival, shelter, and the future. And in the arrival section, it was the things people need in the emergency. So that emergency foil blanket, hot food.
So they're sitting on the table, like they can walk up and buy a blanket.
A child's coat. Child's
very visceral.
Boots,
right?
Very visceral. People literally burst into tears when they.
I know, it's hard to even actually talk about. I don't know why. It's just like because it makes it real. It's not, you're not writing a check. You're like seeing a kid's coat.
Yeah,
right? And then it's like, okay, I can spend 30. Whatever.
Yeah, and you're connected that there's a kid somewhere who doesn't have a coat.
Yeah, it makes it so real.
Yeah, and then
so you just collect the money. You're not really, and that it's just a means to. raise money.
but it really does do that thing at the other end.
Oh, it really does buy a coat.
It really buys a coat.
Oh, I see. Wow.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Just the mechanism that we do that by is by granting it to an organization who's buying coats, and then they buy the coats locally. But we also needed to support services. So we had a life jacket on the table, but you weren't buying a life jacket. Buying the life jacket was supporting search and rescue organizations in the sea. So it was going towards their running costs. So there were both versions. Then in the shelter section, we had like a tent. We had a hygiene pack because a lot of our partners buy a lot of have to buy shower gel and sanitary items and all of those things. And then we had the section, the future, because we don't believe anyone should be living in a refugee camp. And we believe that everyone should be in their final destination with their rights, and be able to work, go to school, reach their potential.
Be in a home somewhere.
Yeah. So one of my favorite items was we had a set of keys and a welcome mat.
Oh my God, you're killing me. You really are. That is just so that was very successful, obviously.
Yeah, it was hugely successful. We made an online version as well. You could do gift cards, so you can buy it on behalf of someone else. And we did it. It's like, dear mum, you won't find a present under the tree this year. Instead, I've bought you a tent for a refugee that really needs it. And
someone can go online right now to love.
Choose.love.
Choose love. Say it again.
Choose.love.
Choose.love.
It's .love instead of .com.
Yeah. Oh, for my goodness. Oh, for the store. Okay.
The store is choose.love, and our organization website is chooselove.org.
Oh, that's what I thought. Okay. Well, that's fantastic, and I will definitely, obviously, put all those things in the
thank you.
All the links on the show notes. But I wanted to say, so I don't know if you know this, but I raised some money for Choose Love a couple of years ago, and I did it by raising climbing. I wanted to climb 14,000 foot.
Yeah, you're so amazing.
Well, it's amazing that I could make it, but I want to tell people about it because you make it so easy to have an event. So if you go to your website now, you can say fundraise. So if somebody wants, I just think that's such a great way to raise funds. I was able to raise $5,000. I could never have given $5,000, but it took 3 weeks, and it just was like that. You get enough people on social media, and 5,000 is not that hard.
But that is why we've been able to raise 100 million. Truly, it's because of people like you. Honestly, it's a movement rather than a charity. Yes, I really think that it is.
I think you are so right that you're starting a movement, or you have started a movement. But I just want to encourage people who are listening to check that out, because it's fun. You can have your own fundraising page in 5 minutes.
Yeah, you can. And even if it's not 5,000, that's an amazing amount, but 550, whatever it is,
I know.
It helps. A meal for someone is 50 cents.
Yeah.
And
for your birthday or whatever, a lot of people do fundraisers.
They do birthday fundraisers.
And I always see people they do running races or something, and I'm thinking you could also do something like a readathon. It doesn't have to be a physically active thing, or a sew-a-thon, or
exactly. I always like seeing lots of people do bake sales, and then they write Choose Love on the cakes.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Everyone loves the bake sale.
Everyone loves the bake sale. Someone did a bake sale for the earthquake. It was a group of chefs actually in London, and they raised literally tens of thousands.
Oh,
it was crazy.
The thing is, it creates community, and I think that's something that people really crave right now anyway, especially for me after COVID shut down. I just let me just be in the community more, because people kind of got so isolated, and I just think it's a great way for people to just get 5 friends together to do something, so
yeah, me too.
Or whatever they do.
Yeah, me too. And it really, it's magical, and that there's human beings on the other end of that who are then able to fund schools, who are then able to make sure their children get the medical services that they need, because people take the time and effort to set up the fundraising page, do the event, climb the mountain, and that's amazing.
Well, what would you I'm just thinking, what is just going forward? What do you see this humanitarian landscape looking like? How's it changing? And because I know there's going to be a lot more environmental, I guess we'll call them, or climate refugees, which you're probably already seeing more of, I'm guessing, or have you? Have you actually come across that yet?
Yeah, absolutely.
That you've had to help with?
Yeah, the kind of stat, and I always feel a bit conflicted about talking about this because it can be used also by people who are anti-migration, but there's some reports that say it will be 1 billion people displaced by 2050 because of the climate. And so for me, that is a signal, wow, we have to start thinking about solutions. We have to do something about it. But unfortunately, for some people, it's a signal we have to build walls. We have to think about putting wave machines in the sea to stop people from coming. I mean, just so crazy.
Stop. Wave machines?
That's a real thing that the UK thought about doing. I mean, it's just
I can't even go there. So,
no. It's basically, it's going to be a few years, decades where the need for supporting community-based organizations who are supporting these communities is only going up. And to be also really thinking about what advocacy we can be doing to get people to think about solutions rather than building walls.
And is that something that you are working on, or you're talking about a lot? Like, how do we change? How do we grow to meet that need? And you won't know. You'll never know, because every year it will change and get larger, right?
Yeah, but, it is. It is.
Well, go ahead. Do you want to say something?
Oh, no, I was going to say, and the kind of responding to emergencies is another kind of big strand of our work. We've seen with the earthquake, with Ukraine, prior to that, Afghanistan, that we're able to mobilize resources and get them where they're needed really quickly. So we kind of have these two strands of work that we're doing.
Well, you're doing incredibly wonderful, incredible work. And I guess the last thing I just wanted to ask you is, like, if you wanted to talk to someone, yourself as a younger person, or a youth that are thinking about going into humanitarian work or even political work, like, would you have any advice for them if they were just starting out? Would you recommend it in general?
You have to love it, I think. But I think that's true of anything. I think if you love something and you believe in it, then it doesn't feel like work, even when it's really hard.
Yeah.
But I think believe in yourself, believe that you can do things differently. Don't take no for an answer. Don't be afraid to fail, I think, is one of the most
you will,
important
again
things. Because you will, and they'll be your greatest lessons.
Yeah. Have you gotten a lot stronger? Do you feel like you've changed into another person almost entirely?
Almost entirely, yeah. I feel like I never want to lose the like core of what it was that made this all happen in the first place. But yeah, I could never have imagined I would be in this position and know what I know now. And I don't take that responsibility lightly.
Well, you know what, that tells me that in another 8 or 10 years, you're not going to recognize this person. They'll probably change that much again, you know.
Yeah, wow. That's
the world is changing so much.
It is.
Well, you're amazing.
You're amazing.
You're definitely my hero. I just love what you're doing. I'm going to do everything I can to support you guys.
Oh, thank you so much. We're all in it together.
We are all in it together, and as soon as we get that through our heads, the world will be fine, right?
It will.
Yeah.
It will. Right. We have to believe that.
We do.
Well, thank you so much for
Josie,
having me and for all you've done for Choose Love.
I haven't done that much, but I'm just getting started. So picking my new venture right now. So we'll see what it is. I'll let you know. I'll keep you posted, and safe travels wherever you go, and we'll stay in touch. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.